Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert. You're at the Listening Post. This week, Sri Lanka. The after effects of the war on the reporting of the election campaign. Silenced at home, but making noise abroad. The lengths the Eritrean media will go to get the story out. And two captives meet their captor. The Guantanamo reunion on British television.
I am really sorry for the way you were treated there when I was there.
And digging into the past.
Perfectly preserved ruins of an online community.
And unearthing a lost social networking civilization.
It was called Friendster, and at its peak, it was a vibrant social network.
Sri Lanka is one of those media stories we keep going back to here at the Listening Post, for good reason. There was last year's final chapter in the civil war there, in which the news media were largely locked out of the battle zone. There was that video that appeared on the internet, which the United Nations says shows government soldiers executing Tamil prisoners. There was the newspaper editor, shot and killed, who, it turned out, predicted his own murder and, in an editorial published posthumously, accused the country's president of being responsible for his death. And now that same president, Mahinda Rajapaksa, and the military man who led Sri Lankan forces to victory against the Tamil rebels are facing off in an election that will determine who will lead the next government in Colombo. Our starting point this week is the media story in Sri Lanka. Is there free and fair coverage of the election campaign? And how can there be when journalists are still getting death threats just for doing their jobs? On New Year's Day, halfway through the election campaign, 13 million Sri Lankans heard their mobile phones beep.
We all received a text message from the president wishing us a happy new year.
And I think a lot of people were like, wow, the president sending me a message.
A personal message that happened to be illegal.
The Sri Lanka Regulatory Telecommunications Commission actually ordered private mobile companies to send out this SMS free of charge. So they broke all laws in the country because they are a state institution, a government institution. And by doing this, they gave Mahinda Rajapaksa undue advantage over all his other opponents.
Control over Sri Lanka's telecommunications authority is one advantage that President Rajapaksa has over his chief rival, General Sarat Fonseca. Not surprisingly, the president is also the preferred candidate of the country's two state-funded TV channels. And state-funded television is the trump card that stacks the deck in the incumbent's favor.
Whichever government that has been looks at it as our PR agencies. And I think that is what has happened. They are being used as agencies that are there to propagate a certain line for the government.
They are entirely dependent on the government to function. State TV has given some coverage to General Sarat Fonseca and perhaps some of the other candidates. But nevertheless, in all their news broadcasts, in most of their political talk shows, Mahinda Rajapaksa dominates.
The problem here is that when the private media looks at the state media and starts acting reactionary, then it's like, we are in a huge mess here. Because when the other media looks at it and says, oh, these guys are doing this, there is a huge vacuum on the other side, we have to feel that what we get is, it's like the opposite beat to what the government media is setting.
Sri Lankans don't trust any particular media source if they stop to think about it. We are a highly politicized society. I guess this happens in any society, particularly ones in which you suppress what is happening.
The Sri Lankan media have never been more suppressed than they were during the final stages of the civil war, which ended in May.
With an endgame seemingly in sight, daring to question the Sri Lankan government or the military can be deadly.
The government barred the media from most of the war zone. The fighting took place out of camera range. The complaints of journalists fell mostly on deaf ears, since much of the domestic media backed the government and celebrated the result.
If you go back to the war, yes, the media was muscled to a huge extent. The media couldn't go out except for several state-run outlets. Nobody could go out there and say, look, we are reporting from the front, because nobody was allowed access like that. Now, but that's not the case with the election.
What the election has done is to open up a space in the media for a debate and discussion of issues which may have been taboo in any other situation.
During the war, the Tamil media was perceived and seen to be by the government as pro-LTTE or pro-Tiger. As a result, a large number of Tamil journalists were intimidated, harassed, threatened. However, after the election was declared, there has been a significant change. And you can see how this government is actually wooing the Tamil media to help them lobby for a Tamil vote.
Hovering over the election campaign was the story of that mobile phone video from the war, which surfaced through a group called JDS, Journalists for Democracy, in Sri Lanka. The video apparently shows government soldiers executing Tamil prisoners. The government denounced the video as a fake, but failed to prove that.
Just 3 months after the Sri Lankan government declared the country liberated from the Tamil Tigers, video footage has emerged apparently showing government troops summarily executing Tamils.
Britain's Channel 4, the first to broadcast it, maintains the video is genuine. And a recent United Nations investigation concluded the same thing.
The conclusion clearly is that the videotape is authentic.
JDS members will only be interviewed anonymously. This one told us the Sri Lankan media have shied away from this part of the election story.
Unfortunately, the findings of the UN are not widely covered in Sri Lankan media, which is a sad thing because we believe that if the general public have access to the material, then they can make a learned decision, especially in an election time.
All of JDS's members have fled Sri Lanka, saying they feared for their lives. They are watching the election at a safe distance, wondering if under a new government anything will change for the news media.
We hope that first and foremost, any government that comes into power should take very strong steps to go against those who have been oppressing the media during the last couple of years. That gives a clear signal to the journalists who are in the country and outside the country, yes, we can work in a free and fair manner.
There has just been too many attacks, too many abductions, too many murders. 29 journalists have left this country. They continue to live in exile. We at the Sunday Leader continue to come under attack and threat and intimidation by this government. So yes, we are hoping that if there is a change, that it will bring about greater media freedom.
Frederica Jans became the editor of her paper when her predecessor was murdered. In his posthumously published editorial, Lasantha Wickrematunge didn't just predict his own murder, he foretold the course of the investigation. Speaking directly to President Rajapaksa, Wickrematunge wrote, "In the wake of my death, I know you will make all the usual sanctimonious noises and call upon the police to hold a swift and thorough inquiry. But like all the inquiries you have ordered in the past, nothing will come of this one too." Wickrematunge was no clairvoyant. He was just a reporter who knew that when journalists are killed in Sri Lanka, the wheels of justice turn slowly and go nowhere. Here's how our Global Village voices see the state of the news media in Sri Lanka.
We can't say that even though the war is over, violence against Sri Lanka's independent media is a thing of the past. Of course, we are extremely happy that well-known journalist J.S. Thisanayakan was granted bail this week. President Obama last year referred to this as an emblematic example of reporters jailed for their work. But it's been a year since the brutal murder of another journalist, the editor of the Sunday Leader, Lasantha Wickrematunge. No one has been brought to justice over the murder. Because the perpetrators of these crimes are still out there, and because terrible laws like the Prevention of Terrorism Act are still in our statute books, the future for independent media still looks rather bleak, irrespective of who wins the presidential elections around the corner.
I don't know who killed Lasantha, but I don't think the government is that interested. In this culture, things only move, there's pressure from the top, and there isn't.
Sri Lanka used to have a vibrant press at the time of independence in 1948. It has taken half a century of meddling by successive government to bring it to its current pass. Now it looks like nothing short of constitutional and institutional safeguards will help restore it.
Thousands of viewers are following what we do on Facebook and Twitter. They check in with us to find out what stories we're working on in case they want to weigh in as one of our Global Village voices. If you'd like to do the same, just go to either of those sites and search us out, or you can send us an email. We're at listeningpost@aljazeera.net. Time now for Listening Post News Bites. In what could be a sign of a coming family feud over Fox News, Rupert Murdoch's son-in-law has reportedly attacked the man in charge of the channel, Roger Ailes. Matthew Freud is a British public relations guru who's married to Murdoch's daughter Elizabeth. Freud was quoted in the New York Times saying that he and other members of the family are, quote, ashamed and sickened by Ailes' horrendous and sustained disregard of the journalistic standards that News Corporation, its founder, and every other global media business aspires to, unquote. For the moment, it would appear that Rupert Murdoch does not share that view. Last year, he paid Ailes more than $23 million to make Fox the unofficial voice of opposition to the Obama administration. And Ailes is not exactly backing down. This past week, he added another Obama basher to his stable of Fox's on-air contributors, the former Republican vice presidential candidate, Sarah Palin. A journalist working in Myanmar, the country formerly known as Burma, is facing a 20-year prison term for violating the so-called Electronic Act, a law that forbids the unauthorized use of electronic media. Lala Win was allegedly working in Myanmar for the Democratic Voice of Burma, an offshore radio and television service that beams news into Myanmar from its base in Oslo, Norway. According to her editors, La has been covering various issues that the Myanmar government considers sensitive, such as the detention of opposition leader Aung San Suu Kyi. The law she was convicted under, the Electronic Act, is being used more and more often by the authorities to punish reporters for sending information out of the country, including over the internet. Last week, we reported on Canada losing its first reporter to the war in Afghanistan. Now comes news of the first British journalistic fatality. Rupert Hamer, a 39-year-old defense correspondent for the Sunday Mirror tabloid, was killed in a roadside bomb attack on a convoy of U.S. Marines that also killed 5 soldiers. Hamer's colleague, photographer Philip Coburn, was wounded, he said, to be in serious condition. Hamer landed in Afghanistan on New Year's Eve for what was to be a month-long assignment covering the Marine Corps' offensive in the province of Helmand. There has been an unusual reunion on British television of an American soldier, a former guard at the Guantanamo Bay prison camp, and 2 former captives there. It was made possible by the BBC and Facebook. After leaving the U.S. Army, Brandon Neely went on Facebook and typed some names into the search box of some of the men he used to guard at Guantanamo. One of them, Shafiq Rasool of the UK, replied,
I am really sorry for the way, one, for you even getting caught up in the whole situation, the way you were treated there when I was there.
Neely ended up apologizing for the treatment that Rasool and other prisoners endured and said he was guilt-ridden about it. When the BBC heard about the exchange, it arranged to fly Neely to Britain, where he met Rasool and another former prisoner named Ruhal Ahmed. The reunion was caught on tape. It was an emotional scene, and not without humor. Ahmed told Neely he looked different without his army uniform. Neely replied Ahmed looked different when he wasn't wearing a jumpsuit. We're back after the break with a piece on Eritrea, reporting on a troubled country from the outside. Welcome back. Late last year, we took you into an underreported country, Eritrea. The African state has become a black hole for journalism. The media rights group, Reporters Without Borders, says the news media, both foreign and domestic, have it worse in Eritrea than any other country on the planet. The control by the state is tight. The conditions for reporters who break the rules are dangerous. In our previous story, the Listening Post's Sinead O'Shea went into Eritrea undercover. This week, in her second report, she looks at efforts that are being made outside of the country to make sure that people inside Eritrea and around the world know what's happening there.
As we previously reported, life in Eritrea, while seemingly tranquil, is actually highly repressive. We also reported that the media in Eritrea has been all but destroyed and that many journalists have disappeared, been killed or silenced. Despite this, some Eritreans are managing to find a voice for themselves. Here in Paris, a radio station, Radio Arena, broadcasts news every day to people in Eritrea. It is the closest thing the country has to an independent news service. The station is run by one Eritrean man. He doesn't provide opinion, he plays music and reads news reports from other media. Unfortunately, such are the risks to this journalist's family who remain in Eritrea that he feels unable to speak to us on camera. He explains to me later that although the authorities know who he is, it would be seen as pushing it if he was seen talking to foreign media. In a country where independent journalism simply does not exist and any critical voice is crushed, his fears are understandable. Yet it is a situation that the government, led by Isaias Afwerki and his supporters, deny. The Paris-based media rights group Reporters Without Borders has for the last 3 years placed Eritrea bottom on its Press Freedom Index, making it the most dangerous place for journalists in the world. Their methodology is frequently questioned by the Eritrean government.
It's the result of long investigations and cross-cutting information that gives these figures. We have contact with Eritreans from the diaspora, with people on the ground, even if, of course, this cannot be widely said.
But the situation for journalists in Eritrea hasn't always been like this. Michaela Rong is a journalist and writer who covered the country for many years.
Yes, I went to Eritrea for the first time in 1996, and there was a really wonderful feeling in the place at the time. And there was also this incredible openness. Complete strangers would walk up to you in the street and they'd say, "Who are you? Why are you here in my country?" And they'd say, "Journalist, great. Let me tell you what I think of my country. Let me tell you what I think of my government."
But that soon changed as President Afwerki, citing pressure from Ethiopia, failed to introduce democratic reform. Critics, rival politicians and journalists were rounded up, imprisoned, killed or just disappeared. Non-Eritrean journalists felt the change too.
I went back there a couple of years ago. It was very clear to me that if I wanted to see people that I used to regularly meet up with, I would have to go and see them in secret. Often they would say, "I'll pick you up in my car." We would go drive outside the city because they didn't want to be seen in the company of a Western journalist. That would create problems for them.
Our pictures are the first that Michaela has seen of the country for many years.
I wonder where they get their uniforms from. The real irony is that the Eritrean government is so clumsy and so hostile in its handling of the press now. But it used to be the opposite. The EPLF, the Eritrean rebel movement, was brilliant in its handling of the press. They'd be taken across at night. They would always be travelling by night with these Eritrean fighters, and then they would reach this mountain fortress in Nakfa. And they'd discover these underground hospitals, these underground schools, and they would talk to these motivated, idealistic, passionate fighters. And the journalists would just come away and they'd have fallen in love with the EPLF.
So how can the international community be of service, if at all, to Eritrea?
One of the problems for the Eritrean people is that basically not many countries care about this country. Not many countries care about this population. I think that our governments should have the courage. We are lobbying for the European Union to ban Isaias Afwerki and members of his government from entering Europe.
Part of the problem is that Eritrea has long distrusted the international community. It was extremely isolated during its long and difficult war against Ethiopia. Fear that war will break out again is the main justification for the media repression inside Eritrea. For some, the Ethiopian issue is more than one of just arms and points to something which could be addressed.
Western media has been very unfair in its treatment of Ethiopia. There's a sort of love affair between the West and Ethiopia. This is a government that heavily distorted the results of the elections, the last elections, that rounded up 14,000 people at one stage, and yet they get very soft coverage. Eritrea is now being dismissed and ignored by the international community because it's seen as a pariah state.
Silence can have all kinds of consequences, but eventually it will create noise, as the actions that this journalist in Paris shows. His audience is growing, awareness is building. You cannot keep people quiet forever.
More Global Village Voices now on the reporting of Eritrea.
Eritrea doesn't get enough coverage. The amount of stuff that is going on there needs to be reported to the international community more. But when it does get covered, I think it is very difficult to have a fairer coverage.
The reason why the media is biased against Eritrea will need a program of its own. But suffices it to say, the fierce independent stance Eritrean government has taken does not sit very well with the many enemies the Eritrean government has.
The relationship between media and government in the UK doesn't compare with the relationship of media and government in Eritrea. It's like comparing apples and pineapples, if you like. Governments everywhere would like to have a bit of control over what the media does and doesn't do. But in Eritrea, it is extreme control, and it's extreme control to the exclusion of all other views other than what the government wants you to hear and to know and to say.
Finally, every once in a while we check in with theonion.com, an American humor website that satirizes the people who report the news as much as it satirizes the people who make news. This week's offering is from The Onion's mock morning news show. It's a fake news story on an archaeological find that was supposedly made online, a lost civilization of social networkers. The idea being that certain technological fads might not be with us for that long. It's our web video of the week. We'll see you next time at The Listening Post.
Last month, internet archaeologist Dr. Maxwell Fry stumbled upon the perfectly preserved ruins of an online community called Friendster. Dr. Fry, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Dr. Fry, tell us about this amazing discovery of yours.
Well, it was called Friendster, and at its peak, it was a vibrant social network with more than 50 million members.
50 million?
That's right. But then, out of the blue, the civilization just ended, and the site was completely abandoned.
Strange.
One day, Friendster users were posting a seemingly endless stream of bulletins about awesome parties and cool shows, and then nothing.
That is
Total
so
silence.
eerie.
Today, the ruins of the site remain perfectly preserved as they were at the time of Friendster's demise, sometime around mid to late 2004 AD.
Wow. Their lives just come to a complete stop, like a fly trapped in amber.
Exactly.
So what happened to Friendster?
Well, no singular explanation is universally accepted. Some of my colleagues believe that a computer virus may have wiped out a large portion of the Friendster users, and then the rest fled their accounts out of fear.
Oh, no.
Others believe that Friendster was only meant to exist temporarily, to fill a void left by another mysterious civilization known as All, or perhaps Aul.
Wow.
Now, if the public is interested, they can go to visit the ruins of the website at www.friendster.com. All we ask is that they don't alter any content.
Right.
They leave the site just as they found it.
Of course. Well, thank you, Dr. Fry, for being our guest.
Well, thank you. My pleasure.